Thank you so much for that. I first heard of Ruby in 2007 when I was asked to become an advisor for a rapid development company that was using Ruby in the Bay Area. And I was really impressed with the technology, but I was actually more impressed with the people I discovered using it as I kind of got into that role. Ruby, with its emphasis on convention over configuration, struck me at the time kind of as a seismic shift in development languages. I actually come from the world of programming tools. The older ones among you might, I was with a company called RogueWave, which we made things like tools.h. We made C++ application frameworks and things like tools.h++ and so forth. And so I came kind of out of that world and happened upon the world of Ruby. Now in those days, before all that, in the late 90s, I was concerned about two trends that seemed to be quite at odds with each other. One was apps needing to become more robust and more feature-rich, websites trying to do more and more. And in isolation, that's fine, but superimposed on that were massively shortened development cycles. And I wondered which of those two imperatives would break first. And it turns out neither did, because the languages and the environments solved for both of them. In its soul, Ruby is a language for the web, for the cloud. And since it basically predates the cloud, we can view its arrival as prescient, if not downright prophetic. Many things that are ahead of their time never lived to see their time arrive. You think about Da Vinci and his drawings of helicopters, for instance. But this was not the case with Ruby. You could see, even in the late 90s, the future form and outline, even at that distance. And I knew that it would have a huge role in the epic drama which would unfold in the next decade. And so it began. But more than being impressed by the language, and I'm not pandering to my audience here, as I mentioned earlier, I was struck by the people who were adopting it. They weren't just your wide-eyed, suspender-wearing, optimistic theorist excited by some shiny new toy. They were people who had jobs to get done, and more than anything, they wanted a way to do that job as best they could, and understandably with as little hassle as possible. That Rose was intentional about promoting programmer happiness meant that it was a technology not actually optimized for a machine, but for a human. And if these guys liked it, I had a good feeling about its prospects. And yet they're not merely pragmatists. The Rose programmers I knew half a decade ago had one eye squarely in the future. And in that spirit, the spirit of looking ahead while staying grounded has influenced the thoughts I wanted to share with you today. So my comments are about the future, about data, and about how it will change the world. I want to give you a glimpse of a world that I think you will all live to see. My faith is that this audience, unlike any other technical crowd, will walk that tightrope with me, that balancing act of seeing the future as big as it can be, but never venturing into the land of mere speculation or wishful thinking. I want to show you a future that I think is inexplicably both impossible and yet inevitable. And I want you to let me know if you feel like I've done this. There's a drug known as Wellbutrin that is prescribed for depression. And it has a long and successful clinical history. And some number of years ago, people taking Wellbutrin noticed that their cravings for cigarettes went down. The makers of the drug, GlaxoSmithKline, tested it and found out that the drug was in fact a highly successful smoking aid. And so they repackaged the same exact drug under the trade name Zyban, and it's prescribed to help people stop smoking. Now, think about that with me for a moment. Nobody ever contemplated Wellbutrin as an anti-smoking drug. It only became one because users of the medicine just happened to notice that it had this effect. And it begs the question, how many unseen connections are there like that in the universe? Causes and effect that we cannot perceive because they're buried in the infinitude of data which populates the universe. I think they are limitless. Another example, schools with fluorescent lighting, children in schools with fluorescent lighting get fewer cavities than children in schools with incandescent lighting. Why is this? It's because fluorescent lighting increases the body's production of saliva, which actually fights tooth decay. The subtle interplay of everything in the universe with everything else in the universe is dramatically more complex than we are able to comprehend. Our ability to find cause and effect within it is highly suspect. We stumble upon causal associations almost by accident, like the scientific equivalent of your chocolate is in my peanut butter. And yet, I think this state of affairs will actually change due to the convergence of four trends. The reduction in cost essentially to zero of four things. Now, three of these are well known to everybody in this room. The cost of storing data will go to zero. The cost of moving data will go to zero. And the cost of performing calculations on data will go to zero. Now, the fourth one of these is a bit more subtle. It is a reduction to essentially zero of the cost of collecting data in digital form. Presently, if you think about it, there's a minuscule amount of data that is actually in digital form. I'm not talking about taking medical records that are in paper and making them digital. I mean all the trillions upon trillions of pieces of data created every second on this planet. Soon, all of that data will be collected passively due to the widespread proliferation of cheap sensors, whose cost is also rocketing towards zero. And this covering of the planet with these sensors is not going to be done by any central nefarious organization. It is already happening because of the immense improvements that data can bring to our lives. A camera mounted on top of my house that scans the faces of everybody that comes and knocks on my door to see if they're a criminal is a good thing unto itself, and yet it also passively collects data. A skillet that detects botulism and remembers everything you ever cooked in it is also quite useful in and of itself, and it generates data. Now, the cost of collecting this data will fall to zero soon. It will become ubiquitous, and the impact of this, combined with the other three trends, will be profound. For you see, already as you pass through modern life, you leave a digital echo of what you do, a picture of who you are and where you are and what you're doing, and more of your life leaves such an echo and will continue to do so. You can see it today, right? When you fill up your car at a gas station, and you pay with a credit card, that records where you are and what you were doing, when you did it. And it's, although abbreviated, it's a telling sign of your comings and goings. Your cell phone already logs everybody you call and how long you talk to them. And so take a moment with me and imagine if this is pushed to its logical extreme. Imagine everything you do is recorded. What if it was all logged? And we'll talk about privacy here in a minute, but assume that it is passively collected and completely private. First of all, imagine every word you said was written down and transcribed for your own personal reference, and this would be very useful. No problem trying to remember what you promised the client last Friday. You would just look at the transcript. Then imagine GPS is layered in everywhere you go. Extremely accurate GPS that tracks your every move, even within your own home. Next, imagine that everything you do is remembered. Not just that you went to a certain address, but that address was a movie theater, and based on where you sat, you saw episode 3 of Star Wars. But let's get more detailed. You're watching the TV and you're flipping through the channels. Every channel you pause on, every channel you watch, every channel you come back to, all perfectly logged. In the kitchen, that pan logs everything you cook in it. Every piece of silverware you're going to own in the future will know you're the person holding it and will calculate the calories and the nutritional value of every bite you consume. Your house will be aware of every room you are in and what you're doing in it. So think with me about everything being recorded. Every single thing you buy and every single meal you order, every restaurant that you visit, every word that you type, every book that you read, the time you had your sprinkler set to turn on, the last time you went to the dentist, everything you saw, everything your eyeball tracked to, and not just that your eyeball tracked to it, but how long you looked at it, and what was your physiological response? Did your muscles tighten? Did you smile? Imagine if it were all recorded, everything, all of your medical records, all of your tax records, every song that you download and how many times you play it, every person that you meet, every single thing your body does, every time your heart beats, every bite that you eat, every breath that you breathe. Imagine if it is all recorded, a real digital echo of your life. Love it or hate it, this is the inevitable direction that technology is taking us. Because this logging is a byproduct of all kinds of things we want computers to help us do. It is profound because if we can actually passively collect all the data our lives generate, we will have created a collective memory for the planet, a record of every cause and effect. This would be a monumental accomplishment of humanity. This isn't just the end of forgetting. It would mean that finally, for the first time, humanity has an extremely robust collective memory. And that we need not learn and forget, learn and forget, learn and forget, again and again, eons upon eons upon eons. We could actually learn things and remember them. Everyone's life experience, every action and its outcome will become the data that make everybody else's life better. So let's talk a moment about privacy. I'm really interested in things we've built the internet to do that have no offline corollary. These are things that teach us about ourselves. You know, I already knew people wanted to sell stuff in their attic or send money to people because before eBay came along or before PayPal came along, because the offline world had already invented garage sales. It had already invented Western Union. But Twitter? Well, that tells us something about ourselves we didn't know. I mean, it tells us a lot of things about ourselves we didn't know. The kind of information we want to share, the immediacy of it. And overall, I'm very proud of the things we're building the internet to do. It reflects very well on us. We're building it to connect with each other and to share information, to collaborate with each other, and to offer mutual support. Now, I know a list of all of the nefarious uses of the internet, but on balance, we're creating it for good purposes. And one pretty big surprise was how much we were willing to expend time and effort and energy for total strangers, people we're never going to meet. No money, no fame, no glory. And you see it all over the internet. And you're the last audience I would ever have to tell this to. You post some personal problem you have on a blog, and people will give you advice. They'll take time to write some big, long forum post just for you, a total stranger they're never going to meet. And so it's nice, isn't it? I mean, to think about it, that we have a natural desire to want to help each other. And so I think if people feel their privacy is safeguarded, they will be willing to contribute their data to the greater good. You know, it already happens. When I buy a book on Amazon, I know they use that fact to anonymously suggest that book to someone else. Because you see, over time, people will realize they're contributing to the construction of a knowledge base that is a complete recording of every action of every member of humanity. And this information will be used to better people's lives in very real ways, as we're about to see. So let's assume that most people do this, that they share their digital echo, this complete experiential logging of their life on an anonymous basis. And assume we have the ability to ask it questions that have never been asked before and get instant answers. You could start looking around for lines that connect things we didn't previously have any idea were connected. The machine might get you started by surfacing correlations that wouldn't be expected. What if it turned out that people who drink a certain kind of coffee have, on average, higher incomes? And further, that people who switch to that coffee see their incomes go up? Or that a certain group of people who do a seemingly unrelated set of a dozen activities report a higher level of happiness than average? Or to continue with fictional cases, what if some gasoline made at a certain refinery burns cleaner or better than other ones? Or what if the population of some endangered animal is declining everywhere but one place? And why would it be that traffic jams are fewer in certain cities than comparable cities of the same size? Why is the dropout rate in some schools lower than demographically matched schools around the country? So let's dive a little deeper into one of these, maybe one with medical implications. Imagine that everyone with breast cancer voluntarily shared their digital echo, this on an anonymous basis. Say they've included the mapping of their genome, as well as every single thing they did in their daily lives, every food that they ate and every exercise they did, every song that they heard, everything that has been passively logged about their lives. Now, with breast cancer, like many diseases, some people get better and some people get worse, and we really don't know why. Imagine a computer culling through this massive amount of data, inconceivably large, and pulling out patterns. And a finding might look like this. People who eat radishes get better slightly more often than people who don't. Now, you don't know if the radishes make people better, or if something that makes people crave radishes makes them get better. So what do? You dig into the data deeper, and you see that it's only people who live in certain parts of the country. The data shows these pockets where radish efficacy is substantially higher. In other places, it is non-existent. The computers would then see that most of the people who got better bought their radishes in stores that were stocked from certain farms. And actually not just certain farms, but farms that use a certain pesticide. And not just a certain pesticide, but pesticides that contain a certain chemical. So what do we do with that? Brilliant doctors try to understand what is happening. Drug companies commission studies to see if this particular chemical found in radish pesticides might cure breast cancer. And then they run trials, and they find that in the majority of cases it does help, in a few cases it doesn't, and it figures out that it helps when you have a certain genetic marker. Otherwise it's ineffective. Wow. I mean, all of a sudden you have this piece of knowledge that for people with these certain criteria, this is going to cure their disease. Findings like this are impossible today. Findings like this are absolutely impossible today. We are unable to decipher the complex interactions of everything on the planet with everything else on the planet. Today we discover things like Wellbutrin helps people stop smoking through chance and dumb luck. And so you can see where it's all headed. Instead of creating a hypothesis and constructing experiments and then modifying and retesting the hypothesis, we can make all of history a test we control for and sift through trillions of pieces of data for meaningful information. For the world you see is full of unexplained anomalies. Why do people who win Academy Awards outlive people who are nominated but don't win? Why do first basemen live statistically longer than any other player on the team? It is said that tall people live shorter lives than short people. And why is this? Are tall people heavier? They fall down more often? One study suggests that it can all be explained by the fact that when tall people fall down, they fall further. And there are many things like this that have some underlying reason that we can learn from. I'm not really sure these are cases that are actionable in these cases, but they're illustrative of the principle. In reality, what scientists are going to discover are more subtle associations of diet and activity and certain behaviors and genetics and so on that will give us insights into how to live longer, happier, and better. And my guess is we won't have to absorb any of this information. If the system, conspirators will call it the system, determines that people like me are happier and healthier with more thiamine in their system, it'll just come up in my custom vitamin formulation, which also includes all the other nutrients I didn't get enough of that day. And since I would trust my doctor or nutritionist to make a custom vitamin formula for me based on my medical records, I would be massively more comfortable letting the system do it based on every bite that I swallow, every bit of my genetic code, and every bite of data it has on the lives of 1 billion people. My body would be kept in perfect condition, constantly monitored and optimized, all safely because it is built on the collective memory and experience of the entire planet. It is the end of the age of anecdotal evidence where, because Aunt Martha takes a teaspoon of honey every morning and she hasn't been sick in years, I should as well. And then we're going to come to understand the outliers better. Why do some people live to 113? They are inexplicably the people who eat a stick of butter every night before bed. And what is it that makes them live so long? Is it genetic? Why do some people keep their mental facilities so late in life? Folklore tells us that doing crossword puzzles helps keep the mind active. Is this true? Well, we'll know in the future. Well, we might even know why. Perhaps mental agility is a result of their extensive exposure to a chemical in pencil lead and newsprint that they absorbed by doing all those puzzles. So we're going to know how to live our lives to best maximize any and all factors. Now, we may prefer not to. We may decide we prefer deep-fried butter on a stick, or perhaps a waffle burger instead of the estimated 2.4 months of life we could have. But the choice will finally be ours, and it will be made based on data. Now, this future is going to come to us gradually. More and more data will be passively collected. More people will participate, and the passage of time will grow this repository. Successes will come, encouraging more data collection and more people to participate. But once this ball gets rolling, it will speed up quickly. This new way to do science will not be limited to scientists. Anyone could sit down at their desk, formulate a hypothesis, ask the machine a question, and receive an answer. They could then modify the question until causalities are found. This method allows us to treat the entire world as a controlled experiment in retrospect. The world will need ever smarter specialists doing more complex work. I'm not saying the research scientist is going to be replaced by the florist in Ohio. I'm saying it's the florist in Ohio that will be one of the millions of people accessing the data, looking for associations and testing hypotheses. She will be the one who figures out that people living in apartments whose floors are coated with a certain sealant are 3 times more likely to be taking antidepressants. A billion discoveries like this, not just health, but patterns in crime. Why are some houses broken into more often than others? Why are graduation rates higher in certain schools? I take great comfort in this. I think the answers to life's most vexing problems can actually be found in the data. And thus, I think we're going to be able to transform the whole world. For you see, if you think about it, most of our hardest problems are in fact technical problems. Hunger is simply a technical problem. There's no reason there have to be hungry people. Disease is purely a technical problem. Poverty is a technical problem. And being that they are technical problems, they almost by definition have technical solutions. And so in the future, I believe everyone is essentially going to be wiser, effectively wiser than anyone who's ever lived. And then we'll finally be able to solve what I call the lasagna problem. Now, to talk about that in just a moment, I want to speak briefly about our history with knowledge and information and the high price of mistakes. This is a guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And he was shot and killed by this man, a 19-year-old assassin named Gavrilo Princip. And he was shot because the driver, Leopold Loka, who was driving the Archduke, took a wrong turn. And because he was shot, this led directly to World War I. And that, of course, led to the Great Depression, which contributed to a worldwide rise in fascism, which led to the Cold War, or the dropping of the atomic bomb, which led to the Cold War, which in turn means that somehow over this entire time, something like 80 million people died. And this T-shirt was created. All of this because one man took one wrong turn. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge. It used to be that knowledge was a very fragile thing. And from your vantage point in the past, the universe of all the things that were knowable was your little village, probably 300 or 400 people. If somebody one village over knew the answer to something, didn't really matter. It wasn't like it existed. So think about that. Humanity, the sum total of knowledge was 400 people. And then, to make matters worse, knowledge was a very fragile thing. It died with the person who knew the information. The minute they died, it was all gone. Unless they had taken the time to teach somebody else, and then they may have forgotten it or misremembered it. And so we would learn these things in some village somewhere, and somebody would die, and it would be gone. And yet, progress came in this world. And then things took a dramatic leap forward with the invention of this, the modern book. And not just its invention, but its widespread proliferation at a relatively low cost. What this meant is that for the first time, ideas were persistent. They outlived the person thinking up the idea. And they were mobile. Complex ideas could easily travel. And they could be in multiple places at once, which a person can't. But this led to a problem. It led to the creation of libraries and a problem, which I call the truth is out there problem. And the truth is out there problem essentially says that if you know what the answer to your question is somewhere in this library, but you can't find it, it says it doesn't exist. So I'm going to talk about that for just a moment. Talk about the very first search engine. The first search engine. We date back to about 500 BC here. In a little part of Greece known as Delphi. And in this corner of Greece, there lived an oracle. And the oracle, there were oracles all over the world, but the oracle at Delphi was very well known. And this man named King Croesus of Lydia, this is probably, say, 400, 500 BC, King Croesus decided he wanted to find out if these oracles actually had the goods. So he did an experiment. He found 7 people that he trusted. He sent them to 7 different oracles. And he said, okay, on a certain date, let's just say July 15th, at a certain time, say 1 p.m., ask the oracle, what is King Croesus doing right now? Now, he didn't tell anybody what he was going to be doing, but he said, ask him, what was King Croesus? Now, the interesting thing is that the oracle at Delphi got it right. She said at this very moment, he's making his favorite stew, goat and turtle stew, which is in fact what Croesus was doing. And this was an enormous amount of fame brought about for the oracle at Delphi. And all of this, essentially you would call it venture capital, came pouring in. All these donations came in to promote it. Now, unfortunately, this early search engine, this oracle at Delphi, had a few problems. The first was that you could only really go, the oracle was only there during spring and summer. So I guess by our standards, we would say it had uptime difficulties. The second thing was that you had to undergo some great quest to get there. And the third and actually most damning thing is the oracle's answers were often quite cryptic. So if you would ask the oracle, how do I treat a burn? The oracle might say, to treat a burn, you must learn to think like fire, or something like that. This is actually what undid Croesus. He went to the oracle and said, should I cross the river Halys and engage the Persians in war? And she said, if you cross the river Halys, a mighty empire will fall. And it was only after he crossed the river Halys that he realized it was his mighty empire that fell. Now, flash forward to the future for a moment. In the Star Trek universe, they made an oracle. That was the computer on the Enterprise. And you would ask it these questions. You would say things like, what's the closest planet with dilithium crystals? And it would tell you the answer. So this is a very old dream, and it's one that we even think about in the future. But what's very interesting about the oracle on Star Trek was that you never ask it what you should do. You would always just ask it, where is the closest planet? Not, should I go there? And so what happened is our idea of what we're looking for in this oracle kind of shifted. And I guess because it had to be a little more real, it became, like a really good version of Google, more than the oracles of old, which actually gave you advice. They gave you wisdom. They told you what you should, under the ideal circumstances, should do. So that brings me back to what I call the lasagna problem. And the lasagna problem, which is the one I think we're going to solve for, that has huge implications for us. Because remember, even if you knew all the information, had access to it, any question you wanted to ask, you could get an answer. It doesn't really matter if you don't know what question to ask. It doesn't matter if the answer is in the library somewhere if you can't find it. So bear with me here. You're in San Francisco, and you're not from there, and you want to know, where should I go for Italian food tonight? Now, back in the olden days, like the 1980s, all you had was data. You could look at the yellow pages, and that's what we used to do. And it would give you a list of restaurants, and you had no knowledge. You had no way to make a wise decision. Then along came the web, and you had data plus knowledge. You could see which restaurants were highest rated on Yelp, which ones the reviewers liked, and so on. You were better off than before in the sense that you could make a more knowledgeable decision, but you were still working with biased information, anecdotal information, the opinions of a few people, nothing like you. Now, to attempt to make a wise choice today, you would take imperfect knowledge and you apply your unique value system to it. You say, I want a meal that tastes good to me in a restaurant that looks nice for what I consider to be a reasonable price. But the web actually isn't able to automatically apply your unique values to these questions. So you make the best of it, You read a few reviews, you ask your friends, you talk to the concierge at the hotel, and we've all had that all turn out kind of poorly. We all have picked essentially the wrong restaurant. And odds are we have seldom picked what would have been the absolute perfect choice for us. So I think in the future, something very much like the Amazon suggestion image for all of life is going to emerge. Because consider that all your friends, people with whom you have actual intimate relationships, well, you basically go and say, where should I go and have Italian food? And what it will start doing is it will go look at all the people who eat Italian food in San Francisco. It'll ask questions, which one drove the furthest to get there? Which ones drove the furthest repeatedly to get there? It'll look at every restaurant you eat at, and it'll pull down all of their ingredient list, and it'll compare that to people who eat at other restaurants like that, collaborative filtering, essentially. It will look at restaurants, it will weigh heavily people who own restaurants, maybe people with Italian surnames. It will look at Italian restaurants around the country that you eat at. It'll look at the size of your favorite dining establishments. And then it's going to look at all these factors you wouldn't even ever imagine relate, like where did you eat food when the moon was full? or the year the buildings were built, or how many tables are in the hotel, or any number in the restaurant, or any number of other factors. And it will be able to take billions and billions of pieces of data and actually come back to you and say, you should eat at Tommaso's on Kearney Street. And this will be an actual decision based on your values and based on an infinitude of data. And then the next day, maybe it will say, did you like it? And you can say, meh. But maybe you won't even have to tell it. It'll be self-learning, because when you go back to San Francisco, if you don't go to that place again, you go to a different place, it infers you didn't like the first one. It might scan all of your emails where you mentioned Tommaso's and other words you used around it. It can actually become self-learning and self-optimizing. And so over time, the algorithms used to sift through all these life experiences will become so sophisticated and so accurate. The system will be able to, in an uncanny way, to inform you and your decisions. Now, of course, the system can only shape the decisions insofar as you take its guidance, which begs the question, will people follow advice they don't necessarily understand? But of course they will. When a doctor says you should take this antibiotic and not this one, you trust their expertise and their medical practice. This is, of course, decisions based upon the life experiences of everybody on the planet. You may think that choosing the right place to eat Italian food isn't actually wisdom in a King Solomon kind of way, but I contend it is only a matter of degree from weightier matters that we associate with wisdom. Where should I go to college? Is a much bigger choice people face. And yet, like the Italian restaurant search, it will be approachable through the aggregate life experiences of everybody on the planet. Where did they go to college? Where are people who are studying what you want? Where do they go? What are their average salaries? How many of them have filed for unemployment since graduation? What books are the professors reading? What have the professors at that college ordered online that you've ordered as well? How many people similar to you went to that college and are now on antidepressants? How many people met spouses and had successful marriages going to these places? The system will look at people like you and express the same preferences and make the same choices. It will look at like where they went to college and what the outcome was. I could list 1,000 variables that might affect your decision, but you see, we can't deal with equations that big. But a computer can solve for it in an instant. A computer is going to be able to absorb all this data and actually advise us. Now, we know that knowing the right thing to do, the wise thing to do, doesn't mean we won't do it. Like people start smoking every day. But what we do know is that the cost of ignorance, in our case of like one wrong turn equals 80 million people dead, the cost of ignorance is incalculably high. And now it's hard to believe that this future is like right around the corner for us. It is inevitable that we're going to start collecting this information. We already are. It's inevitable that we'll use processing power to data mine it. It's inevitable that we'll apply that back to our own lives, and that we will more and more and more and more trust it, even though we don't understand it. You know, I think maybe we've all had that experience of being on Amazon and buying something, and it suggests some product. I bought a book, and the thing it suggested I buy were these little robot salt and pepper shakers. So to pass them, you wind them up, and they walk across the table. I was like, yeah, I want those. And I wasn't looking at anything about robots or anything. And so imagine that on a universal scale. And again, and it will be a world where everyone will essentially be wiser than anyone who has ever lived. Nobody has been as wise as everybody is about to have access to. So it's hard to believe that such a seemingly small thing can change the world so radically. But consider the Industrial Revolution. You know, if somebody had said, by the way, if you take a task and break it up into individual components and train people on it, you can get efficiencies and bring prices down and make radically better products and speed up innovation. And it will change how everything's made, everything. And, you know, it would be like, whoa, that's sort of like a big leap to say from this, you know, process change, you get modern prosperity. But that's exactly what happened. And so I think that this is how the world is about to change. And I think we're going to solve for all these vexing problems that are fundamentally technological in nature. And I think you will all tell your children, your grandchildren, that you were here the moment the entire world changed. You see, it's the vanity of every age to think they're living at the great turning point of civilization. Having said that, we are living at the great turning point of civilization. And you're going to tell them that you were there and you saw it happen. And because the world did change, and because it changed radically for the better, you can proudly claim to have been part of its forming. Thank you very much.